Ezra Levant from the Rebel.media here in The Hague, the capital city of the Netherlands. Behind me, the Parliament buildings. Inside there is Geert Wilders, the leader of the Party for Freedom, an insurgent party that is now leading the polls here in the mold of Nigel Farage's UKIP in the United Kingdom and Donald Trump in the United States. I sat down with Geert Wilders for half an hour. We talked about radical Islam, free speech, the European Union, and other issues. Here's that interview. Mr. Wilders, thank you so much for meeting with us. It's just 3 weeks till the election.
Yes.
Tell me how the Party for Freedom is doing.
First, let me welcome you and thank you for this interview, Ezra. It's an honor to be on your show, as I was a few years ago. I remember very well in Canada, and I wish there were more Canadians with the guts that you have. Well, in Holland we have elections in 3 weeks' time. And we are doing quite well. It's tough. It's only 3 weeks. We are now with almost equal when it comes to the polling with the party of the Prime Minister, the Liberal Party, a more liberal conservative party. But still, it's a fight, and well, there is a lot of turmoil. So I'm going to it looks quite good, but my problem, if I have a problem, is that I have to get my voters to go and vote. That is the most important thing, because we gain from all parties, but mostly from the non-voters. People who are dissatisfied by the current parties and the current elite. So if I manage to get my people to go and vote, I will have a very good success. But if they stay home, it will be different. So that is what I should do in the next 3 weeks. Tell people, come on, these are historical elections. Go and vote and get our Netherlands back. That's my motto.
Do you think that Dutch people are inspired by the Brexit referendum and the Donald Trump election? Does that give people more courage to dissent?
Well, you know, it's what I call the patriotic spring. People, as I said, feel misrepresented by the current political parties, by the current elite, who feel that multiculturalism, mass immigration, Islamization, or the fact that we transferred our national sovereignty to this institution called the European Union in Brussels, and we don't even have the key of our own front door and cannot decide who we let enter into our country or when people should leave. People are fed up with that arrogance of the political elite. And indeed, people see that in the United Kingdom, despite all the fear-mongering from the elite from both Brussels and London, that the economy would go down, that the lights would go out, that there probably would be a war in Europe, that it's not happening. The contrary is happening. A strong economy, a free trade deal with the United States, probably even before the European Union will have it. So it's far better than everybody predicted. And this, of course, is an incentive. It's not about Mr. Trump personally or the United Kingdom personally, but people seeing that despite the fear-mongering from the current political leaders, they can take charge, and they are stronger, and they can put the fate of their own country in their own hands again. And that, indeed, all over the European Union is very inspiring. But the forces against us are very strong and growing as well.
I think that the greatest challenge to both Brexit and Donald Trump were not politicians, was not Hillary Clinton, but rather the media establishment, the political establishment, even the legal establishment. What is it like in the Netherlands? Are there any establishment forces, any media that are supportive of you, or are they all critical or overwhelmingly critical?
Well, of course there are few exceptions, but 98% is very strong against. And the elite, as I call them, is not indeed only the politicians. It's the media. It's also the top, the representatives of the Catholic churches or other churches. It's the intellectuals. It's all the people who are really lost any touch with the common people, and fear for their own position, are based and driven only by multiculturalism, and don't see that if we continue by, for instance, the Islamization of our society, that they will pay the first price. You know, I mean, this is what is at stake today. It's our mere existence that is at stake. It's not like we are facing an economical crisis that you can beat if you have a good policy like small government or lower taxes. No, it's the existential problem. When I go to America or Canada, I always tell my friends there, listen, you are bordering, at least the United States is bordering Mexico. We are bordering, our continent that is bordering Europe is Africa, it's the Middle East. And the African inhabitants, the African people will explode in this century. You know, they have 1 billion people living in Africa today. According to the United Nations, at the end of the century, it will be quadrupled to 4 billion people, where at the same time the European amount of people will diminish. So 4 billion people, 1/3 of them, even today, is planning to emigrate to Europe, which means that what we saw happening with the asylum crisis, with people from Syria and Libya coming to Europe, that we haven't seen anything yet. 1 billion people, mostly from Islamic background, will come to Europe in this century, which means that, and Islam, once again, is not there to assimilate or to integrate. That is the biggest mistake we made, open borders and no demands on new immigrants to assimilate and to integrate. We will cease to exist. And the whole elite is not willing or capable because they invented the concept of multiculturalism and open border policy. So they are fighting it, but they are fighting against our mere existence. And the people are finally waking up because they saw in the last few years, both with the European Union and with the asylum crisis, that we only import more terrorism, more intolerance, more violence, and that it should stop.
Just coming in today, we landed at the Amsterdam airport. We took the train here to The Hague. You can see visually, there's so many Muslim people, women wearing hijabs, things like that. Is it past the point of no return? Even if you were to win and you were to stop new immigration, how deep are the roots of Islam and the Islamification? What is the number? Is it even possible to win if there's a voter bloc out there that's against you?
Well, in Holland we have now approximately, out of a population of 17 million people, 1 million Muslims, which is something like 6%. And I believe it can be stopped. You know, as Winston Churchill said, never give in, never give up, never, 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 ever do that. And it is possible, you know, if we should, not only for what is happening today, but what I just told you about what will happening with the explosion of the demographics in Africa and the Arab world. If we should finally close our borders, and as a Dutchman I have to say we cannot do that inside the European Union because we transferred our sovereign right of immigration and our own border policy to Brussels. So we have to get rid of Brussels as the United Kingdom did to control our own borders again. And if we would do that, if we would finally decide ourselves who to allow inside our country and who not, and how long people can stay, and if we at the same time, for the people who are already in our country, would say the good days are over, if you adapt and assimilate to our values, our constitution, you are not only equal as anybody else, but you are welcome to stay. But if you start acting according to Sharia law and try to use violence or terroristic threats or whatever, we will strip you of the Dutch nationality and send you outside our country. If we would at least start those two things, then a lot of things really would change. The problem is more that if we don't do it, and we stay into the European Union, and once again, the European Union is not only incapable to close its border, but also unwilling. You know, and I'm not personally blaming all those Muslims coming to Europe. Perhaps if I was a Muslim from Africa, I would do the same, to ask for a better life for myself and my family. But I blame the political leaders who allow them to come. This was the toxic combination of Europe in the last few decades, open border policy with not one single demand of assimilation and integration. And if you then don't get people from Mexico, but people with an Islamic ideology, it's not only toxic, once again, it's a matter of our existence. We cease to exist, our culture cease to exist at the end of the century if we don't act now. And yes, it can be reversed, but we have to start acting today.
Are there Muslim liberals, Muslim reformists who support you?
Well, some are, but they are more former Muslims, so apostates, people who left Islam. And then even there are not too many. Within the Muslim community, there are some people who are a little bit tough, but the majority is not speaking out. You know, I always said, after any attack, both in Holland, when Theo van Gogh was murdered, but also in the rest of Europe, where were all those mass demonstrations of Muslims who should say, this is not our Islam. It's big silence every time again. So there are a few that might be vocal, but you hardly hear them.
You have been prosecuted numerous times, not by a Sharia court, but by the Dutch courts.
Yeah.
And you've been convicted. Tell me about that. It seems to me that has rebounded against the courts, that people sense that was an unfairness and a politicization of the courts. Is that a correct observation?
That's very correct. Indeed, they, in many countries they tried to get me to court. Jordan tried to get me to court. The Iranian government, after fitna, wanted to get me to court. At the end of the day, they didn't. The Indonesian government called me persona non grata for my life. And that is everything to be expected, you know, Islamic non-democracies. But hey, here was my own country with supposedly a rule of law. We have a rule of law. And then I was taken to court for saying something about Moroccans. And Moroccans, I asked the people if they wanted more or less Moroccans, and everybody knew the context. Moroccans are of the Dutch people who go to fight in Syria, to fight jihad with the Islamic State. 78% of them are Moroccans. Moroccans are 22 times overrepresented in the crime statistics when it comes to crimes on the street or whatever. So it was politicized, you know. I am a leader of the opposition. The elite, which is also judiciary, is part of the elite. They convicted me because, which is not even part of our law. So I'm the first one that's convicted out of some kind of jurisprudence also from Europe, but not according to the Dutch law. They said that according to them, nationality has to be seen as a race. So as far as I know, and as far as also the Dutch people know, and they don't understand the verdict, whatever you think about my opinions, Moroccans are no race. It's a nationality. It's like you say, I want more or less Mexicans. You're not talking about all the Mexicans, but you want less Mexicans. So indeed, this was not a very popular verdict. I will appeal to it as well, because people didn't understand. They knew just before the elections a popular politician and then a verdict about race that, as a matter of fact, I'm not a racist. I was speaking about a nationality.
In Canada right now, there is a motion before our parliament that calls on the government to, quote, eliminate Islamophobia. But it doesn't define Islamophobia.
No.
What do you think the risks are if that becomes a sort of law to eliminate Islamophobia? What could go wrong?
Well, everything could go wrong, especially if you don't define it. I can predict you that all those kangaroo courts, as you have as well as we do, will make sure that everything falls under the definition of Islamophobia. So what it actually means is that the multiculturalist, the cultural relativist, that they end the freedom of speech. That if you start talking and speaking out your mind and tell the worries about millions of your countrymen, whether you're a journalist or a politician, that you will be stopped. That you either will be taken to a civil court, as you experience, or to a criminal court, as I experience. So it's the end of freedom of speech. And it's the current elite that is not defending our values, that is not defending our freedom of speech, but is helping the Islamization and end our freedom. And let me tell you, it's happening all over the Western world, that at the end of the day, if Islam becomes more prominent, and it will, because criticism about the Islamic ideology will be stopped, they will take it to courts and do everything, that at the end of the day, people will find out that Islam and freedom are incompatible. So we are not only losing our freedom and our freedom of speech, but we are letting an ideology, a totalitarian ideology, win that at the end of the day will kill us all, whether or not our ideology, then in persons, if they get their way. Look at all these societies today where Islam is already dominant. In the Middle East, you see that there is a total lack of civil society, of rule of law, of a middle class, that journalists, apostates, Christians, homosexuals within a society are unfree and often punished until the moment of death. And That is not something we should import. You should be able to criticize that in order to let our country stay free. And by so-called fighting Islamophobia, they let Islam win and end our freedom. And that is why we have to stand up and fight it politically in the press and everywhere, despite the repercussions.
Our Canadian state broadcaster a couple of days ago referred to you as far right. Now, if you're leading the polls, I don't know how that's even statistically possible, but your other issues, whether it's gay rights or feminism or even issues like drug use or prostitution, how would you characterize yourself? Is this even a left-right issue? Are you a social liberal?
No, it's not. You know, I don't like being labeled. You know, the Dutch Prime Minister, my competitor in the elections now, always calls me the most leftish person in Holland.
Really?
Because of our social policy. Because we believe, we are not socialist, but we believe that cuts when it comes to the homes of the elderly, cuts when it comes to our public health system, cuts when it comes on all the things that the normal common people have to endure. You know, remember, we are also, beside the European Union, we are also a member of the Eurozone. And in the last few years, we had billions, in the last 7 years, 50 billion austerity measures in Holland. People's pensions were cut, the public health were cut, the taxes were raised. And at the same time, the people saw that we sent billions of Dutch euros to countries like Greece and other countries, that we spent billions of euros to people who came to Holland as so-called asylum seekers, which were mostly young men, traveled through 6, 7, 8 countries to come here in Holland because of a big fat welfare state. And people are dissatisfied with that. And we say, stop, we are first elected to take care of our own people. And I cannot explain that we sent money for extra pensions to Greece and we have to cut the pensions of the Dutch people. So I'm criticized in Holland for being left. I'm not left. We are winning by some votes from the left. So I don't like to be labeled. We might be cultural conservative, but when it comes to the left, you know, we win from left, from right, from non-voters, because we have the combination of, at the one hand, cultural conservatism, but on the second hand, choosing for our own people instead of anybody else.
I want to talk a little bit more about women's rights and gay rights.
Yeah.
In the past, in the recent past, separation of church and state, feminism were powerful ideas of the left. But where is the left? Where are feminists? Where are gay rights activists on separation of mosque and state? Can you help me understand, what's your observation in the Netherlands? Why are people who spoke bravely against the Christian church meek in the face of Islam?
Yes. First, because they are very afraid. They are not brave and they are cowards. Secondly, because what you mentioned before, they are getting more and more dependent on their vote. You know, the second city of the Netherlands is Rotterdam, after Amsterdam of Rotterdam, and in the last elections of the Rotterdam municipality, the left won because of the Muslim vote. They got the majority because of them. And that was huge. And you see it happening as well all over. So the people who invented the multiculturalism in Holland, the people who cherish the cultural relativism, the biggest disease we are facing for so long now in Europe, people who are afraid to say that our culture based on Christianity and Judaism, on humanism, is far better than the Islamic ideology. You're not a bigot or a racist if you say the Arab world says nothing else in their countries. At least that we could learn from them. But we are not even doing that. So the cultural relativists who invented it, they are unable to say we were wrong. We were wrong by getting all those people here and not demanding that we treat women equally, that we don't beat up gays, that we have a separation of church and state. They were unable to do that. And they still are, because then they have to admit that they made an enormous mistake. And secondly, they are depending on their vote. So the people have to change it. The politicians won't.
All across the West, there's a belief in freedom of religion. Is Islam more than just a religion?
Well, Islam is not a religion. I know it sounds crazy, and I know I don't get a lot of support for that idea, but I strongly believe that Islam might be dressed up as a religion. It has a holy book, it has a temple, it looks like a religion. But it's more an ideology and a totalitarian ideology than a religion. You cannot compare it with Christianity or Judaism. You should compare it with other totalitarian ideologies like communism or fascism. And I always use one example to prove it. There are many more. That like in communism and fascism, the penalty is death if you want to leave it. I mean, you cannot leave Islam. If you're an apostate, if you're a renegade, the penalty is death. And even today, in our societies, let alone in the Islamic societies, it is enacted upon. You know, people are killed for that reason. You can leave Christianity, you can leave Judaism. So, and the other point is that Islam wants to rule. The word, as you know, Islam means to subjugate, wants to rule and dominate and subjugate not only a person's life, but also a whole society. You know, the rule of God, the rule of Allah, the rule of the Quran and the Hadith is the rule of the society. You know, they are not, I'm not talking about all Muslims, I'm talking about the ideology. And the ideology cannot integrate and assimilate in a society. It wants to dominate it and wants to subjugate with violence. The Quran is full of more violence and anti-Semitism than Mein Kampf, for instance. People, academics have proved that. So our biggest mistake is, once again, the false equality, that we say that Islam isn't religion. So they have the freedom of religion. And I believe it's not a religion. It should not be treated as a religion. And the constitutional freedoms of religion do not apply to an ideology. We would not allow in Holland Nazi schools, for instance. It's another totalitarian ideology. Why do we have Islamic schools? Why young children in 5, 6, 7, 8 years old that we want to integrate, get a job, get Dutch friends, participate fully and equally in the Dutch society, are being taught up with the Quran and an ideology of hate towards everything that is what we believe in. That's a wrong thing. We should not apply to it. But people say, no, it's the freedom of religion, it's the freedom of education, and you should allow all it. It will, at the end of the day, as I said, make sure that we have lost our existential rights. We should stand up and be tolerant to the people or ideologies that are tolerant to us, but finally start becoming intolerant to the people and ideologies that are intolerant to us. And the last thing, everybody forgot, unfortunately.
Are there other countries in Europe or elsewhere in the world that are a role model for you? What do you think of Hungary, for example? What do you think of Eastern European countries?
Well, I met Mr. Orban not so long ago, half a year ago, privately, and well, I think he's a hero. I think he's the one that says that my country is a Christian country and I don't want it to be Islamized. My women and daughters will not be raped or whatever, insulted in the streets of Budapest or Pécs or Miskolc or any other Hungarian country. We will not do that. And Europe, forget it. They will not do that. And listen, the former Eastern European countries, when it comes to immigration, they are more our allies today than the Western European countries, like the Czech Republic, like Poland, like Slovakia, Romania, Hungary. They know what totalitarianism looks like. They've seen it. They've been under the umbrella of Moscow. And now we have Brussels. And of course, I'm not saying that Brussels is exactly the same as the communist empire and the USSR, but still, it has also some totalitarianism inside. And they know that they don't want that again. And they stand up and they say, we don't want this kind of immigration and asylum seekers. We don't want our culture to be eroded by a culture of violence. They don't want to leave the European Union as we do because they earn a lot of money because of that. The Dutch are the biggest net payers per capita to the European Union, and they are the biggest receivers. Mm-hmm. So you will not hear them to ask them to leave the European Union, but they say stop, no more immigration, no more asylum seekers. We are a Christian country and we want to stay a Christian country, and for that they can be and have to be applauded. They are more heroes than the rest of the Western European leaders together, and Mr. Orban is a very good example. I think he's a very strong politician.
I want to try and make a connection between freedom of speech, Donald Trump, and speaking critically of Islam. One of the things that surprised so many political observers about Donald Trump was that he didn't care about political correctness. He would say things that were shocking to the political classes, but ordinary people said, right on. Even if he went a little bit too far, I think they liked that. Do you think that people in Holland, people in the Netherlands, are sick of being told what to think and say and what words to use? Do you think there's a resentment to this word policing, or do you think people are just keeping their head down and not wanting to get into trouble?
Well, you know, Holland is not America. But still, you're right that, and that's what I liked for the first time, whatever you think of Mr. Trump, there was a politician that made some promises, and he actually fulfills, at least tries to fulfill his promises. And the whole world was shocked, because the guy just did what he promised to do, which is today, and it says more about politics than about Mr. Trump, it's very uncommon, very unusual. Politicians promise a lot of things, and at the end of the day, they fulfill nothing. And in Holland, it might be part of our system because we don't have a two-party system and we have to make coalitions with 5, 6 other parties. But in America, in the two-party system, he is just doing what he promised to do.
But what about the fact that he, I think, encouraged ordinary Americans to say, I'm not going to be quiet anymore. I'm going to say what I feel about immigration, about Islam, about Mexico, and I'm not going to be shushed anymore.
No, that's what a lot of people indeed like, both when it comes to free trade and the American jobs, both when it comes to indeed immigration and Mexicans, both when it comes to the Islamic countries and its policy towards that. And you see, there is a lot of, in Holland we see most of the time all the resistance in courts and rallies against them. But if you know America, you know America better than I do, but if you travel to America, you see that there is also a lot of support. There are lots of people, as you say, that believe that the guy is trying to do what he believes. And once again, whatever you think about this policy, he is, in a way, doing what a lot of people, even within the grand old party, the Republican Party, missed in former governments, even when they were in charge. You know, it's like, in a way, without a total comparison, the old Reagan times revive, and I believe it's a good thing.
Are you an optimist or a pessimist? Do you think people will wake up in time, or will it be too late?
Well, you know, I'm an optimist. I would not sit here with everything my country and I personally have endured in the last years with losing my freedom and everything, taken to court, all these threats by this terrible Islamic organization. I have to be, and I really am an optimist. And even if I would lose the elections, I'm sure that the genie will not go back into the bottle again. Of course I want to, and I'm very confident, to win the elections. But, you know, the discontent of the people who sense for the first time that their existence is at stake. Don't forget, only in the last year, 2016, all over Europe, there were terroristic attacks, sometimes twice a day in Germany. We saw it in so many countries happening. People know that Islam and immigration, they don't hate Muslims, neither do I, but they know that the open door policy and sending our money there and the cultural relativism is at the end of the day not a good thing. And they will not stop. The only danger is that the current elite tries, as they often try to do, to adapt in our way, or fool the people by just changing the policy for 10% and then at the end of the day return back to their old customs. And we need a revolution. We need a democratic, non-violent, but we need a revolution. We need a revolution from the people to stop the elite for continuing what they are doing, which is killing our countries.
Well, here's what I'm worried about, is as the courts and the media and the politicians and the police say you're not allowed to criticize, as they drive people out of the establishment, if people can't express themselves politically, if they can't see success, I'm worried that people will go to violence. People might even return to fascism that Europe saw 80 years ago. I'm worried that by marginalizing good faith critics, leftists are actually creating a worse response to radical Islam. Donald Trump is peaceful. Nigel Farage is peaceful. Marine Le Pen is peaceful. Frau Capet, you're peaceful. if people can't have a peaceful solution, is there a risk of violence?
Well, you know, that's why they should cherish us. Because, as you rightfully said, if people like my party or the UKIP party or Le Pen's party, if they would not be there, what would be the alternative? At least we are canalizing in a democratic, non-violent way the concerns of so many people. I'm an optimist. I believe in the rule of law. I believe in non-violence. And I believe it's still possible to change things. So I will not go into what would happen if we won't get our way, because I believe in the non-violent democratic way. And we are still at a point that what you asked me before, yes, it can be changed. And it's tough. And the closer we come, and the more people support us, the more the elite, the journalists, the courts, the politicians, the churches will fight us. You are right there, because they know they are losing ground. And that at least is a positive thing. How strange it may sound, if we would be unimportant and marginalized and representing 0.1% of the people, they would not be concerned. They are concerned. They are cornered and they are afraid. And we have not to step back or use violence, but we have to work even a little bit harder to get more people behind us in a demographic, non-violent way, and accept that the battle, the democratical battle, will be tough. And as you said, they will, whether it's in your country with Islamophobia or my country by taking people to court or trying to adapt a part of the policy, they will try every trick in the book, and we have to stay on track and fight them for the people and the freedom of our countries.
Geert Wilders, thank you very much for your time, and good luck in the election.
Thank you so much.
Nice to see you again.
Thank you.
Ezra Levant from the Rebel.media here in The Hague, the capital city of the Netherlands. Behind me, the Parliament buildings. Inside there is Geert Wilders, the leader of the Party for Freedom, an insurgent party that is now leading the polls here in the mold of Nigel Farage's UKIP in the United Kingdom and Donald Trump in the United States. I sat down with Geert Wilders for half an hour. We talked about radical Islam, free speech, the European Union, and other issues. Here's that interview. Mr. Wilders, thank you so much for meeting with us. It's just 3 weeks till the election.
Yes.
Tell me how the Party for Freedom is doing.
First, let me welcome you and thank you for this interview, Ezra. It's an honor to be on your show, as I was a few years ago, I remember very well, in Canada, and I wish there were more Canadians with the guts that you have. Well, in Holland we have elections in 3 weeks' time, and we are doing quite well. It's tough. It's only 3 weeks. We are now with almost equal when it comes to the polling with the party of the Prime Minister, the Liberal Party, a more liberal conservative party, but still it's a fight, and well, there's a lot of turmoil. So I'm going to, it looks quite good, but my problem, if I have a problem, is that I have to get my voters to go and vote. That is the most important thing, because we gain from all parties, but mostly from the non-voters. People who are dissatisfied by the current parties and the current elite. So if I manage to get my people to go and vote, I will have a very good success. But if they stay home, it will be different. So that is what I should do in the next 3 weeks. Tell people, come on, these are historical elections. Go and vote and get our Netherlands back. That's my motto.
Do you think that Dutch people are inspired by the Brexit referendum and the Donald Trump election? Does that give people more courage to dissent?
Well, you know, it's what I call the patriotic spring. People, as I said, feel misrepresented by the current political parties, by the current elite, who feel that multiculturalism, mass immigration, Islamization, or the fact that we transferred our national sovereignty to this institution called the European Union in Brussels, and we don't even have the key of our own front door and cannot decide who we let enter into our country or when people should leave. People are fed up with that arrogance of the political elite. And indeed, people see that in the United Kingdom, despite all the fear-mongering from the elite from both Brussels and London, that the economy would go down, that the lights would go out, that there probably would be a war in Europe, that it's not happening. The contrary is happening. A strong economy, a free trade deal with The United States, probably even before the European Union, will have it. So it's far better than everybody predicted. And this, of course, is an incentive.